Hello everybody, Nick Peternell here with MTG.1. Today we are going to continue our attempts to break Renegade Rallier in Standard. And today we're playing Abzan Aristocrats. Now this name is borrowed from the Return to Ravnica era Aristocrats deck based around Cartel Aristocrat and Falconwrath Aristocrat. Basically the idea is that you have resilient creatures that do something when they die or do something when they enter the battlefield and you don't really care if they die. And you use those along with, in the day it used to be Blood Artist, but now we have Zulaport Cutthroat, to set up board states where your opponent can't kill your creatures anymore. And you do some nickel and diming, and then at one point, you'll have like 8 creatures and a Yeheni or some way to sacrifice creatures, Ailey and Hidden Stockpile, and you just kind of start sacrificing your creatures to throw them at your opponent, and then suddenly they're just dead. That being said, it's not always as simple as just throw your creatures at your opponent. Every point of damage matters in a deck like this, and every point of life matters. Sometimes you end up racing. Sometimes you end up, needing every last creature, and even a single missed trigger for Renegade Rallier or something like that could mean the difference. So decks like this are really rewarding to play, but they're also extremely difficult, and I'm all about that kind of deck. So, why play this deck? Right now in Standard, it has pretty decent matchups across the board. I actually like the Mardu Vehicles matchup quite a bit. And by I like it, I mean maybe we're favored. It's just kind of the way that deck is. The matchup against 4-color Saheeli is a little worse. We don't have a lot of good interaction in the main deck, but we have some sideboarding options that help us out a lot there. And overall, maybe it's 45 combined. I'd say 45, 55 against those two decks. And that's an okay place to be. I mean, if we have better matchups across the board, then it starts looking better for us. Green-black's not miserable. I like that matchup quite a bit, actually. Sometimes the Verdurous Gearhulks get out of hand, and same with Walking Ballista, but we have a lot of tools too, like Vengeful Rebels, just a beating. We have the Fatal Pushes, which is good against them. Ailey's good against them. And a lot of times against them, you'll be able to engineer Zulaport Cutthroat kills. So that matchup's not too bad. And I think it's just a generically powerful strategy. I don't think that this is as good as it used to be in Return to Ravnica block when we had Voice Resurgence and Cartel Aristocrat, but I think it's still fine. So for our resilient threats, we have Blister Pod mainly, is I guess the Doomed Traveler, Young Wolf of this era. And then we have Hidden Stockpile, which is, I guess, I don't know, making direct comparisons is bad, but maybe the Voice of Resurgence. Basically, anytime something dies, you'll end up getting a token at the end of the turn. We have Yeheni, Undying Partisan, which is our Aristocrat, which sacrifices something to do something. It's a really resilient creature. The Indestructible's huge on it, and we can pair it with the Fatal Pushes and the Vengeful Rebels and just hopefully get them in the chump block mode to where Yeheni gets to, a 4/4, a 5/5, and suddenly we have a real threat there. And then we have Gideon. Token makers are usually very good in this deck. Back in the day, they played Lingering Souls, and they would play Sorin or Grook. And now we have Gideon. It's only a 3 of, not a 4 of. There's an argument to never play less than 4 Gideons if you can, but he's not the all-star that he is in a lot of other decks. He has some cool interactions though. If we have a Hidden Stockpile out and no way to trigger Revolt for the turn, we can just emblem the Gideon and trigger it that way. And then suddenly our Hidden Stockpile is making 2/2s. And we can kind of go wide that way, and it's a pretty powerful line of play. But I found that the casting cost is kind of difficult in this deck, and not always where you want to be. You don't want to have too many in your hand, although you can just emblem them. There's a chance it's 4 of, but we'll try 3 for now. Thraben Inspector is a critical card in this deck to trigger Revolt. Sometimes you'll go Hidden Stockpile on turn 2, and then turn 3, Thraben Inspector, crack the clue, get a token, and it doesn't sound explosive, but this deck isn't an explosive deck. It does other things, and I think you'll see why that's a solid start for this deck. We have 2 Ailey. I like having a lot of ways to sacrifice. Being able to trigger Revolt is critical on a deck like this. And we need ways to sacrifice our creatures and make sure that it's turned on. To trigger Revolt, we have the Renegade maps and the Evolving Wilds as our main way of doing that. We have a couple really good lines with Hidden Stockpile. Really, what I'm talking about here is the Renegade map and the Hidden Stockpile draw, where you can trigger the Revolt on it in turn 2 and just make it a Bitter Blossom. And typically this deck won't have issues turning it on. Past that, we can use Yahenni to sacrifice a Blister Pod or something to turn it on. Obviously, you don't go up on creatures when you're sacrificing your creatures, but you know, there's a lot of times when you're engineering a creature to die and it ends up working out pretty well for us. Let's see, in the sideboard we have 2 Authority of the Consuls for the Saheeli matchup, Natural Obsolescence and Fragmentize. We have Fragmentize over Natural State because we value the white casting cost a little bit more, and it's easier for us. We have Walking Ballista for the Saheeli matchup. We have Transgress the Mind. It's kind of a generic catch-all. We bring it in post-board against Mardu vehicles because typically they'll go to the control shell against us. Ajani, same thing. If they're going to Planeswalkers, we'll go to a Planeswalker and grind with them. Ajani's pretty insane in this deck. If you notice, almost all of our cards are non-land permanents. I think that's 35 hits in the deck. So we'll often draw 2, sometimes 3 cards with him. Very, very powerful. We have the other 2 Vengeful Rebels. In a lot of matchups, this is just the best card in the deck. Against vehicles, especially if they stick with the aggro variants, we'll be able to usually just, trade 2 for 1 with a Vengeful Rebel. And it blocks reasonably well, and it'll trade for creatures. And then we have 2 Anguished Unmakings. This comes in post-board in almost every matchup. It's good against, it's reasonable against green-black. It's reasonable against the Planeswalker version of vehicles. And we need answers to Saheeli too, so it'll come in there. And it'll tag Chandras and stuff. This deck can sometimes fall behind to Planeswalkers, so it's important to have ways to keep board parity that way. Anyway, that's Abzan Aristocrats. We're going to take it through some games. Hope you guys enjoy them.